My usual set of watercolours, and the brush is ready, and you see I've got two clay shapers there, here, a nice pointy one for this job for the thistles, and my Pabio drawing gum again, which I think is one of the best masking fluids, and a piece of £140 Bockingford, just masking tape, not stretched, doesn't need to be for this, and we're just going to mask off all these spiky areas. It's an ideal technique here for these birds because all the spiky bits of the thistles and some of the light areas on the birds, the highlights in the eyes and so on, are ideal for the masking fluid, so we'll just do that. And by putting on quite a wedge of masking fluid here, because there's going to be a lot of light areas, and dragging them out with the tip of this fine point, I can get these lovely fine thistle areas for traditional watercolour without using white paint or white gouache. And this will give us all these lovely... And then when I actually paint it, we can paint some of the darker spiky areas over the top, so even the bird here can have its leg. And then we just drag them out to these spiky thistly shapes. Great fun, quite simple. So we'll do the whole thing like that first, and when it's dry we'll come back to painting the birds. Right, there's the masking fluid, and one of the beauties of this Pabio is you can see that it's a grey colour, so you can see what you've done. All I have to do now is just clean my rubber clay shaper off. It comes off very easily, look, much easier than having to use a brush. And you can do that sort of fine work with it if you're careful. I'm going to need two brushes. I've got a number 2 here and a number 10. Start with a larger brush, background will go later. First thing to do is to paint the birds. And we're painting by numbers basically, little bit by little bit. We've got a very light area here, so some clean water on there, and a little touch of cobalt violet to go into that. Just along the lower edge, like that. Dry the brush off, just suck that bit up there, and we'll just tint that in slightly. A little bit of burnt sienna, just a touch of burnt sienna. I'm working from a photograph here, which is a bit more limited, but rather difficult to get these birds to sit for me, so I'm putting a bit of ultramarine down there for the shading. I'm going to blend that back in again with a damp brush, soften it down a lot. It's only meant to be shading. The light areas, all down the side of the wing here, there's a very light little bit of white, so we're just going to tint a bit of cobalt violet into that as well. And down the tail there, well, the whole of the back of the bird is quite cool, so what I'm going to do is take some of the cobalt again, come all the way down the back of the bird here, right the way down to the tail. And cool is quite strong in the shadow, so I'm going to make it a bit stronger. And then if there's too much, we'll take it back a bit with the brush, sucking up the liquid. We only want to paint wet next to wet, where an area is actually going to go soak into the colour next to it, otherwise it will just become one big blob. And leaving the white, paint that all the way down through that yellow area. I'm going to take the chrome yellow, cadmium yellow will do, whichever, drop that in, get that lovely strong yellow. Darks to go over that again later, purpley blue here, so we'll mix some ultramarine with a little bit of deep purple, just to get that colour there, that grey, blue grey. All around here there's quite a nice light brownish area, so I'm going to take some thin burnt sienna and just work over that whole area there. And now some feathery effects into that, so let's make our slightly warmer brown for that. And we'll just drop those in, just tickling the wet onto the wet to let it spread out in feathery texture. Gradually working up these details. Now coming through here we have the feather effects So gently building it up bit by bit by bit, darker under the shadowed area. You got the tail. If it's a hard edge that we don't want, then take your water and just soften it back a fraction, gradually working it up darker and darker and darker as we go along. It changes to a slightly more bluey grey, greeny bluey grey coming down here. Now these darker areas, we're going to use some Prussian blue and burnt sienna and a little touch of purple because it's slightly warmer. We're letting some of it just softly blend into one another, wet next to wet. You can just start to see the bird's shape taking form now more. We've got a little bit of masking fluid on the eye to bring that highlight out there. Same dark, if we use it thinner, as a dark grey. So here for instance, just thin it out a bit, look. We can make our deeper greys with that. While that's still wet, let's just drop in a bit more of the feathery effects of the dark. That's what watercolour can do. We're controlling the accidental part of the watercolour, in other words, as it flares out. And again, don't want a hard edge there, let's soften it back. Warmer in there maybe, so we'll drop a little bit more light red in. And that's still darker in there yet, so we want a bit more stronger colour, so we'll drop into there, and darker yet. I feel we can be a bit stronger with the blue coming down there yet. Now let that dry a fraction. Let's look at the red up here. What I'm actually going to do is drop in a little yellow first, a little cadmium yellow, and drop the red onto it to keep that brightness of the red. And I don't want it to sink too quickly, so I'll just put a bit of yellow in there first, over there. His face, down here, the chin. And then into that we'll drop some bright, very delicate job. And that bird's almost there, we don't need to do a lot more. Let's come to the hen bird. And we're going to go straight for that yellow. Get that in straight away for fun. And then this light brown area. Give it a thin wash first of light red. Which is a one step up from burnt sienna really, I'm cooling it down. Let's take some of our cobalt that we were using earlier and get her shadowed in. Cool shadow on that side of the body. Gently giving that mottled effect. There we are, that gives us the softer effects of the bird. Let that dry again a bit, and we'll work into that. In the meantime we'll look at this area. It's drying gradually, we don't want to put much detail into that until it's a little bit dry. Then we're going to spread a brush out, get a slightly more bristly effect to get some of the feathery effects with the dry brush. And just, still with the larger brush, just start to work in these glazes, these details. A glaze is one colour over another, a transparent colour over another. And we'll soften this back down, wet into wet in just a second. So glazing one colour over another, wet over the dry now, because now we're actually onto these darks that are in the tail feathers. Amazing what we can do with just one brush. And this number 10 is doing this for most of this work here. It's just about dry enough there now to drop in a bit more dark. Make that tip of that beak. Now, it's a bit sharp just here, and so while it's still just damp, I'm going to take the brush with a little clean water and soften that back in to go in again in a moment with the darker after eye down again, and we'll lift out a bit more and just touch up that beak with a fine brush and do the eye, strong in shadow there, these feathery effects. It's dry there now, so I'm just going to remove a little bit of masking fluid from that bit only. Take the